Hello everyone, so I'm in an area that I'm very familiar with. This is the Magnolia Center section of Riverside. I grew up very close to here, and some people call this Riverside's second downtown of sorts. Right behind me is the Dairy Queen that I grew up going to. It's an outdoor stand. It dates back from probably mid-century, the 1950s. The chain started around that time, so it might be very close to being an original. It's family owned, and so they actually would be closed during Christmas time and in January when I was a kid, and then they would reopen in the springtime. I'm gonna try my favorite here, my lifetime favorite. It's a vanilla cone dipped in cherry. So this is the Marcy Library, the newer location. When I was a kid, I would come to this library a lot, except it wouldn't be here. It'd be down the street and to a right on Central in a small little building that now houses a thrift shop. So this is Low Park near the corner of Magnolia and Arlington. And what makes this park famous is it has 3 redwood trees. Here's one of them right here. These are baby redwoods. They're just over 100 years old, and these trees, they live 2,000 years. They were actually donated to the city of Riverside by the Chicago White Sox, because back in those days, Riverside was a big deal. It was the leading citrus capital of the world. It had the highest per capita income of any city in the US. Today, this is just kind of a quiet park, except for at certain times there's a lot of homeless people here. But I do wonder what it'll be like here centuries from now, because these trees will be much bigger by then. So when I was a kid, this is where our family doctor was. And he's passed away 7 years ago. But he had a private practice here. He was a medic during the Vietnam War. He was from the New England states. And he went into his own business here. He had his own nursing staff and his own receptionist. His name was Ron Van de Woestijn. He's buried at the Riverside National Cemetery, about 15 miles from here. One thing I always remember about my childhood family doctor is his favorite holiday was Halloween. And being from New England, he visited Salem, where the witchcraft trials were back in the 1600s, and he bought this really big life-size statue of a witch. And he'd have that in his lobby area around from about September to early November. And another big interest that he had too is he loved celebrity trials. So back then there was the O.J. Simpson trial, there was Kobe Bryant trial, Martha Stewart trial, Michael Jackson trial, and he'd always be up on the latest trials, and he'd be talking about it and gossiping about it with people. You might think that this Catholic church was one of the original Spanish missions. Actually, it just dates from the 1950s, but it's in the basilica style. So 20 years ago, this church is where I would come for Cub Scouts. So these are the classrooms where Scouts used to meet. And back then it was so rickety, it probably still is today because it doesn't look like a lot has been done here. It was so rickety that when a lot of the older boys would run on the hallway there on the second floor, the building would shake and you'd think it was an earthquake. So right across the street here is the Ed Martin Garage, and this has been in the Martin family for decades. They finally sold it 2 years ago. The specialty of this garage is repairing and renovating hot rods from the 1920s to the 1950s. And the longtime owner, Willie Martin, is involved in a hot rod ministry, and he helps put on the annual Independence Day church picnic and hot rod show at Packing House Christian Fellowship in Redlands, which is a great event to go to. So all through Riverside, a lot of the streets are named after the US presidents, starting with George Washington. But the last president to have a street named after him in Riverside is Richard Nixon, and here's Nixon Street. So do you like navel oranges? Well, if they're grown in California, their great-great-great-grandparent plant is that tree right across the street there. That's the parent navel orange tree. It was planted in 1873. When I was a child, it used to be open and anybody could see it. Now they have it under a greenhouse because they're trying to protect it against pests. Churches are everywhere in Riverside, but this Presbyterian church is the oldest. It almost looks like it belongs back east somewhere. It's from 1881, just a couple years after the city was founded. Spanish Revival, Victorian, Federal style. There's a little bit of everything on Magnolia Avenue between Arlington and Madison. Very interesting for architectural buffs. You just get to see so many different styles of homes. A lot of these are from the late 1800s or the early 1900s, like the 1920s. And some of these are private residences and some are businesses as well. So this is Heritage House. Heritage House is one of the best examples of Victorian architecture in the US. Back in the 1800s, when Riverside was in its agricultural heyday, the city had a large British population. At the time, Britain was the world superpower, ruling the largest empire in human history. The British had access to all sorts of architectural styles due to their vast empire, including styles from India and the Middle East. So they created these fusions of architecture, like what you see here. This particular home was built by the Bettners, an American couple influenced by the British culture of the day. This home is open for tours on the weekends and has a lot of Victorian furniture, art, clothing inside. Also, there's beautiful grounds here. I would walk up here to read and relax as a kid, sometimes not even taking the tour, but just hanging around the beautiful grounds. Riverside also hosts a Dickens Festival each February. So I hope you enjoyed this brief tour of the area that I grew up in. It's a pretty interesting place. It can be a little bit rough in some places, but it's very nice in others. It has a lot of history, has a lot of natural beauty. Thank you so much.